Hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to another edition of the Indian Av Geek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Today, we welcome the one and only Brett Snyder, the Cranky Flier, a man who's been an airline dork since he could barely reach the check-in counter. By age 12, Brett was already a travel agent, and while most kids collected baseball cards, he collected LAX timetables and forced his brother to plan imaginary trips just for the fun of it. Now, as the president and chief airline dork of Cranky Flier LLC, Brett's sharp humor and deep industry insight have made his blog a must-read for AvGeeks and airline executives alike. He's the brains behind Cranky Concierge and the founder of Dogfest, where aviation nerds unite under the roar of jet engines. Welcome to the Indian Av Geek, Brett. We last spoke in 2013. I had this silly Globetrotters on Twitter thing going on for my blog. You kindly said yes to that, and I had interviewed you. And it's terrific to welcome you to my podcast now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. 2013, that was a long time ago. You've come a long way here with the podcast now, huh?
In my humble opinion, you probably run the most popular aviation blog slash analysis website in the world. What got you interested in the business?
It's hard to know. There was nothing like I didn't have parents that worked in the industry or anything like that. I just always really liked it from when I was a kid. But I think I was more unique compared to a lot of people that it wasn't the flying. I didn't want to be a pilot. It wasn't any of that. You know, I was the kid collecting timetables at LAX, running around, and like the logistics of it, the whole network aspect, it's complicated and it's fun and it's crazy. And, what it enables in the world as well is just impressive. So that's what got me into it. But I started writing in 2006, which is shocking that it's been almost 20 years at this point. But that was some friends encouraged me to start writing about the industry because I think the way they put it was that I had so much random knowledge, someone might actually be interested in this. And so I did. I started writing, and here we are today, 20 years later.
And this is quite a time for aviation around the world. In your part of the world, there is something called tariffs on an overdrive. By the way, we call that duties in India. How do you see it impacting aviation?
Oh, absolutely. It has to. I mean, it impacts the entire world when the US puts tariffs on nearly everything on nearly every country, and can't make up its mind on what level it wants to keep the tariffs at, which is absolutely maddening for anyone because what matters is certainty. Uh, a world with tariffs is not my ideal world. It's not good for aviation in general. It puts up more barriers, but a world with uncertainty around tariffs is far more dangerous because nobody knows where things will end up. But when you think about it from an aviation perspective, I mean, of course, just a general economic slowdown is bad for aviation. It reduces travel demand, business ties get cut or lessened, and all of those things come together to make it more challenging. Then when you have the uncertainty, you add on top just consumer spending going down because people don't know what's happening and they want to save and don't know where they'll stand in 6 months, so they don't spend as much. And so all of that comes together to make for a very turbulent time for the airlines.
Delta had mentioned that they will not be paying any tariffs. Now we know they are routing deliveries through Tokyo. At least that's what they did for the recent A350 before bringing the aircraft to the US. This maneuver allowed them to avoid the aircraft being classified as a new import. when the plane arrived in the US. So they bypassed that 10% tariff imposed. Do you see more and more airlines taking that stance, and how would that affect commerce?
Delta has said this before with Bombardier back when they were working on the C series, and now they're saying the same thing. This is for aircraft specifically. They're saying they're not going to pay tariffs on it. And I think what they're saying is, look, we will not pay that price. We will pay the price we contracted for. So the choices will be either somebody can negotiate a political exclusion that says, okay, aircraft are not going to be subject to tariffs, or they're expecting the manufacturer to absorb that extra cost. And otherwise, Delta says it doesn't need new airplanes, I guess. It'll be happy to keep going until this all gets resolved. But it's maybe more possible with a 10% tariff than it is with a, I don't know, 850 million% tariff or whatever's on China right now. But you know, it's still not easy for people to just absorb all this. So we'll see how Delta comes out. For other airlines, I would assume that the big guys that have leverage would feel similarly. But you know, then you have Chinese airlines which say, well, we're just not going to take any of your airplanes right now. So, uh, yeah, Air, airlines are used to, over the last several years, not getting the airplanes they wanted anyway, thanks to delivery delays, regulatory issues, whatever it may be. And so I think they'll just find a way to deal with this and work around it. They have the ones that have leverage will do that. The ones that don't, it's going to be challenging.
I was going to come to that. Chinese airlines sending back some of their 737s. There was reporting from Bloomberg and locally here from Times of India that Air India is now in touch with Boeing to take some of those aircraft. Even Malaysian Airlines expressed interest. It has happened in the past where Air India Express, the low cost arm of Air India, took some whitetails. We've also seen subsequent reporting where China has said that they are willing to come to an agreement. And of course, as we talk, there are discussions being held in Geneva right now between US and China on a variety of trade related issues. Overall, Boeing wouldn't mind this so much as of right now, right? There's a massive backlog of orders already.
I mean, in the short term, Boeing may not be concerned about finding a place for these airplanes because it does have a backlog, but you can't live without China being open to you in the future. China is enormous. It's an important market, and if it is owned by presumably Airbus and Comac in the future, then that is a huge blow for Boeing. So, sure, in the short run, fine. You can find someone to take your airplanes. Air India will probably take any airplane at this point. But um, but yeah, it's not really a sustainable strategy. It only helps speed up the rise of Comac as an important producer of aircraft, which it is not yet, but it will be at some point. And Boeing is not really able to participate in that world right now.
I was talking to Richard Abulafia a couple of weeks back on the show, and we started discussing Comac, how technology for the aircraft majorly was procured from the West, how 919's range is still not as impressive as 320. It's a heavier aircraft as well. There is, of course, some time to go before Comac gets their production facility in order as well. Now, does that all mean it's advantage Airbus for now from a global market point of view? Boeing obviously has few things going against it right now. I would like to point out that US and UK, they they just reached a limited trade deal, and there's one happening with India as well soon between India and US. But from a distance, it seems that Airbus is stealing a march. And how?
It certainly doesn't hurt Airbus, that's for sure. I think if you're Airbus, yeah, you have opportunity. Now, they also have a huge backlog and don't have the ability to deliver a lot of airplanes in the short term anyway. So, that is an issue that uh, they need to think about. Maybe it's an opportunity for Embraer in some places to place some airplanes. I don't know. I mean, obviously a smaller airplane, but it could be that. But yeah, that is one of the real issues right now is that there just is not a lot of availability of new aircraft with delivery dates pretty far out for Boeing and Airbus if you're to go and place an order. Does that mean Airbus can't find some room for some important Chinese airlines? I'm sure it probably can find some if it needs to. But if you're Comac, yeah, that is not a competitive airplane, but it doesn't matter. It is Chinese, and if the Chinese want it to be the airplane they operate, then they will have to do it. Um, but on the other hand, it's only going to get better from here. I mean, when Airbus brought out the A300 initially, that was not a great airplane. There were a lot of modifications before that was even a good airplane. Uh, and you know, the A320 was their breakthrough. But even then, you think about the early A320s and where it is today, it's significantly different. That initial airplane didn't have much range. There were a lot of issues. It's you just build on it, and China has the resources to keep building, and it's just a matter of when the Comac airplane is a decent enough airplane.
That's a good segue. You were just talking about Embraer, Brett. There have been talks about Embraer investing in a new generation narrow body, NGNB, bigger than their existing range, possibly competing with the A319 or the 320. Do you see that happening, or is that quite a stretch for Embraer?
I don't know. They don't have the resources that the others have, right? They have state backing, but it's not enough to really guarantee the ability to succeed with a much larger program like that. They're still trying to get the E2 to get more traction. It's doing okay, but there's room, right, for that to grow. So would airlines welcome having that option? I would think so. Anytime you have another option, that's not bad, especially when you can't get the airplanes you want right now. But I don't really know enough. You need to get John Ostrower on here because he can tell you more about that part of the world. But there is an opportunity, and if airlines want to commit to it, then it can happen. But it's risky and very expensive and time consuming. And I'm not sure if Embraer will actually end up moving forward on something like that.
Yeah. Although they're doing well financially, but I'm unsure if their balance sheet can support massive R&D spends required for it. But that in turn reminds me of something. The A220 in its earlier avatar as Bombardier CS300 was a great aircraft, but somehow it did not get the traction it deserved. Airbus acquired, rebranded, and now it certainly looks like a much more successful program. Completes the lineup for Airbus, flying successfully for different airlines across the world. Embraer E2, similarly, fantastic aircraft, but hasn't got the success it deserved. Boeing had made a play at Embraer for acquisition and it did not work out. Do you see Boeing making another effort at it with the new management?
I hope Boeing doesn't do that because
No? Okay.
it needs to get its act together. it doesn't have time to digest this. I mean, it's already taking over Spirit Aerosystems, trying to right the ship on that so that it can get back to building quality on the 737 fuselages, stuff like that. It's trying to fix all its issues in house. To me, that would be more of a distraction than anything, and I don't think it's one that Boeing really needs. Uh, that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen, but I think it would be a mistake when you're in the position that Boeing's in right now, since I don't think it needs to have that smaller aircraft. Um, in the long run, maybe. I mean, I think for Airbus, it was able to step in a very favorable position when Bombardier was in trouble and become a joint partner initially in the A220 or what would become the A220. And so, that's sort of a different story than going into something where Embraer is arguably a stronger company right now. That's a different situation. But I don't think Boeing needs to be in that market right now. Maybe at some point it decides it wants to be, but I think at this point that would be a mistake. It needs to put its priorities elsewhere.
Let's come to the Indian market. Somehow it seems it's always been on US based airlines' minds, but they haven't been able to crack it. You look at American, you look at Delta, you look at United, it's been kind of half hearted, if I may say that. I wanted to understand from you why they haven't been able to crack the India US market, leaving behind the geopolitics of Russian airspace. And so,
Well, that's the big reason.
but that happened 3 odd years back. Even if you go pre-pandemic, there wasn't much of a solid effort. It was mostly one-stop traffic
Yeah.
from Gulf connectors or some European airlines or Air India. US-based airlines rarely made a serious dent.
Well, I think if you look at coming out of the pandemic, United was really trying to grow that market. It saw opportunity. It had a bunch of flights. And then it lost Russian overflight and it had to get rid of most of them. And some of those were exciting, like San Francisco, Bangalore. That's a that's a great market. Can't do it right now. And some of the other ones too. It's the same issue. So United saw it, but I think when you start going back further than that, it does become an issue of aircraft range and capability, and what's the right way to use those airplanes. So, American is barely in the market again with, I guess, JFK to Delhi, right? And I can't imagine that does all that well. That's not a huge hub for them anymore, occasionally. Uh, but it is still obviously a huge local market. So, they're still trying to struggle with that one, even with longer flight times to go the southern route. Um, Delta is the one to me that I always find so odd, because they did do that. Let's run it through Amsterdam for a while there, which it's not really helpful. I mean, who cares? You can fly through Dubai or Doha, and you can connect to every city in India with one stop, even
With
with the
every city in
restrictions.
US, every city in US,
It-
almost to every city
well,
in
the big
India. Yeah,
cities, the
yeah, yeah.
big cities,
Yeah. I mean,
but
yeah.
yeah, but you can get two stops from anywhere in the US by doing that. And that's, that's Delta wasn't adding much value by going through Amsterdam and having these two long flights instead of the one. I just don't really. That was sort of this legacy of the old days. It didn't have local traffic. I know it had KLM there, but it wasn't really adding much value for that. Now, they keep thinking about getting back in, what they'll do, um, how they'll handle it over time, what they'll grow. I don't know, but I think most airlines are looking at this. One of the issues in India is that so much of that airplane is like ethnic traffic, it's VFR, it's visiting family and relatives. You need to fill up a ton of coach seats, and then you still need to fill them up front, right? So if you're truly competing with Emirates and Qatar and all these low fare guys, which they're not, I mean, in business class they can charge more, but they're still charging less than maybe the US airlines would want to do. Um, then you don't see as much opportunity there. I think you look at like United to Africa, they do West Africa a lot. That's where the growth has been. Places where you don't want to fly through the Middle East, it's too far, it's a backtrack. And so when I see things like that, you sort of see this sphere of like where the Middle East carriers are most efficient and where it's not as helpful. So United, yes, very interested in US to India with the nonstops. Also has its Emirates partnership, which can help it further, help create more connecting opportunities. Um, Delta and American seem very far behind, figuring out partnerships and things like that, but not really putting a ton of their own metal into it. But at the same time, when you've got this geopolitical situation, it is so much easier and cheaper for Air India to fly these routes because they can go right over Russia, save a bunch of time, save a bunch of money on gas. Like, how do you compete with that? It's really hard to do that. Um, Even with the product that Air India puts on some of those airplanes, which is terrible on some of those airplanes. But it's, you can still fly nonstop from San Francisco and you can't do that on someone else. So I think it's just a really hard market that unless Russia is able to open up that airspace, which I don't think that's happening anytime soon, I think U.S. carriers will continue to struggle.
I was talking to the COO of Bangalore Airport few months back on the show, and he spoke about the negotiations he and his team, um, they had to do to bring United into Bangalore.
And American was going to come too. They had both
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah, and he was telling me how it was heartbreaking when everything just unraveled. Presently, out of all US carriers, you would hazard a guess that United would be the one most likely. Anyways, most international of all US carriers, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
More proactive.
More proactive, really trying to grow that international network, go to places where others don't go, especially other US carriers. And so, I mean, that San Francisco Bangalore route, no question they want that. No question that would make sense. 787-9 can do it. And they just need that airspace to open up again. And that's really what's so unfortunate about all of this is geopolitics ruins everything. But, such
Yeah.
is the way of the world.
That's true. Brett, few weeks back you wrote about Norse, and you had mentioned in that piece how it had finally found a way to make money by leasing aircraft to other airlines, including IndiGo. Now, in February this year, IndiGo had announced that it would damp lease 4 787-9s from Norse Atlantic. Earlier last week, we got to know there will be two more. Now, these aircraft, the fifth and the sixth in this partnership, are expected to start operations by early 2026, serving long haul routes out of India. Do you see that as a sensible way for a hybrid carrier like IndiGo to start their long haul ops on the back of somebody else's fleet?
Well, it's the easy way to do it, but it's not necessarily the right way or it's not necessarily the cheapest way. But it does help that Norse is pretty desperate. They have airplanes and they don't have places to put them, right? So with that in mind, I am sure Indigo is able to negotiate a pretty good deal here. And I was told that it starts as a wet lease and then over time that'll change and IndiGo will develop the competencies to do it itself. I mean, at some point, IndiGo is just going to walk away from Norse. There's no reason for them to keep using them. But if they think that this is a good way to start trying to understand the markets, even if it loses money, they make so much money on the rest of the network. This is not a huge piece of their business, I think, that they can use it as an experiment and see how it works. Uh, this is something that I guess they can get away with. No U.S. carrier could do that with labor protections to go and work with another airline like that. But um, it is an easy way to, dip your toe in the water and see if it's warm enough. Should we do this? Should we do more of this? So I don't mind it for IndiGo. They're so big. They've done so much growth within the domestic market for over the last
65% market share in domestic.
yeah, it's incredible, right? I mean, it's just think about the old days with Indian Airlines and everything, and it's like a completely different country at this point.
Yeah.
But because they have gotten to be so big and they've covered the domestic market so well, to try something like long haul is not really that big of a task compared to their overall network. And so I don't see a problem with expanding into that, see if it works. I will just be very curious to see where they go from here. But this doesn't feel like a long-term thing to me. And so maybe Norse is just hoping that it'll find a magical way to use its airplanes and make money somewhere else. But for now, this is a comfortable place for them to put those airplanes, I guess.
And IndiGo, by the way, is getting some XLRs starting later this year, hopefully. Then you have 359s coming in 26/27. So there are aircraft coming up to scale up their international operations. And before I forget, there's more. They have two 777s from Turkish flying with them. There are few 737s from Qatar also. They have a whole smorgasbord. If you look at their current fleet, you'll see 320, you'll see 321s, and you'll see about 50 or 80Rs doing regionals. It's an all-star team.
Yeah, I mean, the XLR, I'm still unsure on. I want to see how it will actually perform. Should be a good airplane, but not if you're in high volume markets because it's not a big airplane. But if you're running, I don't know I don't remember what IndiGo's configuration is on the Turkish airplanes, but
Well, there are 7 business class seats on that aircraft sold by Turkish. That cabin is only sold by Turkish. And then there are 524 economy seats, high density.
Norse also very coach heavy.
The Norse aircraft operates with 338 seats on board. This includes 56 premium economy seats and 282 economy seats.
Right. And so that's where you're going to add a lot of value in the Indian market if you're IndiGo. Because it's, again, that VFR traffic, right? So much of that traffic going over to Europe, stuff like that. The XLR, you need to find smaller markets with better fares that can make more sense. So I'll be curious to see how they place all those over time. But I think it's a very certain type of market that makes sense with an XLR. And if they do go with a very dense configuration and a very coach heavy configuration on that airplane, then it's probably not going to have as much range as they might want it to. So I guess we'll find out. I'm just not sure that that's the right airplane for the Indian market. But, they have some ideas there, I suppose.
Well, IndiGo will be opening long and thin routes, North Asia, Europe, points of Africa. There are also opportunities to connect some of their existing international stations with other hubs in the country, hopefully without any payload restrictions. So that's also an exciting opportunity for them. Indigo would probably look to stimulate the market with lower fares, and you can look at cities like Tokyo, Seoul, Athens, Barcelona, Geneva. Like you said, leisure routes. They will always have a premium product in front, which they refer to as stretch in domestic market. In the American market, you do have Iberia flying in every day from Madrid to Boston, I think.
Yeah, is that the one that's winter only and then in summer it's a wide body? I can't
Oh,
remember.
okay. Okay.
But
Yeah.
some of those they've done that in like the thinner seasons is when they're trying to do it. But there's also, that's Boston, Madrid. I think they're doing Dulles, Madrid, which is also a thinner market. Those are business markets, government market. That's very different than a pure leisure market like in Athens or a Barcelona or something. I'm just curious to see if it works. I don't know enough to say that it's a bad idea. I'm just not sure about it, and I will be very curious to hear what Indigo's network head says to you about that.
I have this piece right in front of me, Brett, that you wrote in December of 2022. It's titled Singapore Makes a Big Bet That Air India Can Get Its Act Together. So, 2.5 years in, do you think SQ will be happy?
Oh, I have no idea. It is still a work in progress. I am certainly impressed at what Tata has been able to do because Air India was words can't describe just what a mess that
I know you
airline
want to
was.
say Alitalia. You want to say Alitalia?
Yeah, yeah. That's
Close.
an. I mean, they were up there. There's sort of the Alitalia, Air India, Aerolíneas Argentinas. Like
No,
put
but
those
I always
three.
thought Alitalia had a special place in your heart and in your
It
blog.
does. It
Yeah.
does. It is the worst airline ever, and it always will be. But Air India and Aerolíneas Argentinas deserve an honorable mention, or deserved an honorable mention. But Air India, they have made a lot of progress. I mean, it's no easy task because you first of all have such political meddling. I mean, you see these stories all the time, right? They come out about some politician wanting this or that or whatever it is. And then they had so many different brands that they're trying to pull in together. The Air Asia India, they get Air India
Tara.
Express, and then they
Yeah.
have Air India, and then they had the
Vistara.
Vistara, and yeah, all this stuff. They're just trying to like pull it together, and the product was so far behind, and they had so much work to do. So I don't think this is a story that could be written yet, but it is certainly impressive what's already been done, the way that I look at it. And look, I mean, if there is any airline that has benefited from geopolitics, it is Air India. Their ability to fly over Russia has been a huge advantage for them. Now, if they could just get some frequencies into China, that'd be, that they need to open that market up a lot. But yeah, I think that Air India has done pretty impressive things considering where they started from. But to say anyone would be happy right now, I think we're still pretty ways away here from seeing an actual success story.
You, of course, have a keen interest in the US regional aviation market. I keep reading that on the blog. Now, if you look at our regional market, the Indian regional aviation market, very nascent. I know completely different kind of market dynamics at play in the US, smaller airlines flying for larger carriers. But is there any advice you can give to regional operators in India based on your expertise?
This is a hard one because cultures can be so different and can support different things. And I look no further than just north of the border in the US. In the US, it went all jets. There are very few turboprops. Nobody wants them. You go north of the border, there are turboprops flying around everywhere and connecting people together, and they love it and have no problem with it. So it is a just it's so strange how different markets can develop in such different ways. The thing about India, it's still a young market, right? It's still, I mean, if you don't have to go back that far to see when India was pretty much Delhi and Mumbai and a few other things, and that was
Yeah,
pretty much
Bangalore, maybe Bangalore. Yeah, but
yeah,
you're
a little
right.
bit in a
Yeah,
niche, but yeah.
but you're right.
And
Yeah,
now there's so much opportunity, and there's so many dots that need to be connected, right? Because you had these old line hub and spoke airlines that did their thing, but there are so many markets. It's similar to China. You know, think, oh, that small city of 10 million people. Uh, but there's not. I mean, you have the trains in India, or you have buses, or whatever it may be, and there's so many other types of markets that people use to get between cities. And so I think about some of the other countries that we've seen develop their aviation markets. You think about like Brazil, which Brazil, terrible road transportation in a lot of places. So not similar to maybe what you see in India. But Mexico is one that had, so many people on buses, and they still do. But now you have Viva Aerobus, or sorry, just Viva. They changed their name, and Volaris that are enormous and taking the lion's share in the country. Um, and they haven't even touched the regional aircraft, the smaller airplanes. So that's the thing about it, is that there's so much opportunity with bigger airplanes first, and so much stimulation that just keeps going. And so the regional world, I think in the US, the reason that you still have service to a lot of these small cities, the smallest of cities, it's because of the government. They have programs that make people serve them with essential air service program. The mid-sized cities, they have changed a lot over the years. And it used to be that airlines would say you should be happy that you have a 50-seater and you have a jet. Shut up. Take the flight. Go away. Now, to be competitive in those mid-sized types of cities, now you need that first class cabin, and you need the extra legroom options, and you need all of that. But what has changed in the US so much is that you just have fewer hubs. You have less connectivity in these smaller cities. And so this is where now we've gotten into the world of like Breeze and Allegiant, where they're finding different ways to serve those cities with bigger airplanes and connect the dots to other places that they aren't served by the hub and spoke carriers. So that's how the US has sort of evolved in this. But, India is, it's hard to know where it will go. It's all about chasing the demand. And right now, you don't really need to chase it so much on the regional side, but I mean, there are props flying around there. There are smaller airplanes there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but it's just, there's so much opportunity with so many people in that country, and so many that don't get on an airplane yet. And to me, the bigger issue is just infrastructure.
On infra, we've made sizable progress, about 75 odd airports, new airports in the last 10 years, besides upgradation of existing ones. But you're right, long way to go. I just want to go back to one of the topics we were discussing earlier, Brett. US Airlines and their Indian operations. Now, few months back, Alaska Airlines in their recent investor deck had Bangalore to Seattle penciled in. Do you see that happening?
No, absolutely. That would make sense for Alaska, because Alaska, now that they've acquired Hawaii and they have wide bodies, they're putting them in Tokyo, they're putting them in Seoul. They are already very well positioned for the corporate business in Seattle. There's a ton of tech business there. If they can open up a nonstop to Bangalore, they're going to fill those airplanes with all kinds of business class. It's like United flying San Francisco, Shanghai with you know, the Apple contract up there with people all over the place. You go into Bangalore, you've got Microsoft, you've got Amazon, you've got whoever. they would be able to fill those airplanes, and I think it would do very well. But you need Russian overflight.
Like you had titled one of your posts, only Russia is holding India back from a US Airlines point of view.
Oh yeah,
With Air India and Indigo controlling about 90% of the domestic market in India, it's effectively a duopoly we have due to consolidation in the sector. The US has gone through some serious M&A activity in the past as well, though admittedly a much larger market geographically as well. Are there any lessons that the smaller airlines can draw from the US market on how to compete with these Goliaths, with these bigger airlines?
don't be SpiceJet. Uh, they're
Okay.
that airline has died how many times? It somehow comes back to life just when you think it's gone. Uh,
You should know why it keeps coming back. You can take an
it's
easy guess.
follow. Yeah. Well, anyway, but sure. So, I mean, you have like Akasa, right? Or some of these guys that are trying to make a run at it. This is what will happen though. You see Indigo maturing and now going long haul, and it adds to their cost base and it adds to all this stuff. And so that does create opportunity for other airlines to come in and find a niche that they can fit into. Um, Things are changing so quickly in the country that it's hard to know exactly what that would be. Uh, at any given moment, it could change because of everything that's happening there. But Air India, the big hub and spoke carrier, uh, not probably worth competing with that. I think that's a mistake. If someone were to come in and say, we're going to create a new hub and spoke carrier, first of all, you're not going to get the gates in Delhi or Mumbai or wherever you want to go anyway. But
By the way,
there
two
is,
airports coming up in both in Delhi and in Mumbai.
i- sure, event, yes, but then it becomes it's a political game, right? So are you really going to try and go up against Air India directly? And I mean, and it's not even just it's Tata, right? Like that is
Yeah.
the the just trying to go straight up against them is probably not the right plan. Now, maybe you find an idea that there's real opportunity in oh, I don't know.
In some other city. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to call it Madras, but whatever.
Yeah, Chennai. You
I
can
know,
call
I
it
know,
Chennai,
but
you can call it Bangalore, Hyderabad, all these cities, right?
I know any of these places there could be an opportunity, but
Yeah.
uh, maybe something there where they. So you have the opportunity to go into other markets where maybe others are not focused on. If you think about like what Alaska Airlines does here, it owned Seattle. Yes, Delta went in later, but there was an opportunity there when Alaska, granted, not a new airline, but there's a niche for it to have there to become the preferred carrier in a certain place like that. So if it's something that's going to be more of a focused carrier um, that's that's really looking at like a corporate type of market, looking for those markets that are underserved by Air India, that's a good place to go. But if it's something as well that's more, well, we want to be lower cost, we want to do this, find the cities where there's demand and see if you have a different model. I mean, that's what Allegiant did when they came in 20 years ago, and they looked at it and said, okay, we see a lot of these small cities, they have enough demand a couple days a week to go to Las Vegas. We should do that. And they've kept growing, and no one else is in there because it's a totally different type of model. It sounds easy when you look backwards because they already did it. But that's the kind of thing that there's that opportunity um, in India. If you just find the underserved market, that's where you should slide in. And then the question is, what is there really room for? When you're in the US, you talk to Scott Kirby, president, CEO of United. He says there's really only room for two premium airlines in the US, and it's United and Delta. American might disagree with that, but it depends on the market. You look at like Aeromexico in Mexico. That's the one network carrier in Mexico, and that seems to be probably what it can support. So every market is different, and it's a matter of just finding out what the right equilibrium is.
Lots of chatter around, especially from the Airbus camp, about their next generation of aircraft. They spoke about hydrogen at the Airbus summit. Then recently we got to know that it's shelved or delayed. What's your take on all of this? There has been lots of chatter around propulsion, around wing design. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll see. I think, there's always talk about different kinds of propulsion. I remember, 30, 40 years ago with the open engine, the pusher propellers, or they're all different kinds of things. Now the body design, the wing design, that seems to be a really interesting one. We have Jet Zero, trying to build that kind of delta wing,
The truss
whatever you call that.
design. Yeah.
Yeah, the embedded wing body thing. I'm sure there's a more eloquent way to say that. But yeah, so everyone's looking at these different designs to try and figure out what makes sense. I think what we'll find that drives this, though, unlike maybe in the past, like Boeing with the Sonic Cruiser when they had that idea, I think what will drive it will be how can we lower costs? How can we carry the right number of people for less money, further open up aviation to other parts of the world? And that is going to be the real question. So right now you've got Airbus with a very impressive narrow body that the world seems to have taken to pretty well. You have the A350, great. On the Boeing side, you have a somewhat less impressive Max. Still big improvements over the previous generation, but it's not. I mean, we don't need to rehash
Still a
this.
50-year-old aircraft.
It's still a 50-year-old aircraft, but yeah. So, Boeing needs to be working on that. The 787 can go for a while. It's got the 777X coming eventually. The thing about this is that it just gets harder and harder to build a new airplane and get it certified. And especially in the US, my God. I mean, they can't even get a variant of the Max certified at Boeing right now because it's just complete disarray in the regulatory agencies. And then with everything that Boeing did, that whole deliberately crashing airplanes, that was a problem. I mean, with the Max, these are the things that are now so difficult to overcome that it just gets harder and harder and more expensive. And so you think about things like Boom with its supersonic airplanes or Jet Zero, which I like that concept a lot better than Boom. You still need so much money and so much time to actually build and certify and get these airplanes going that it's really hard to know. I mean, there's no way we're going to see anything significant for at least a decade, at least, and that's probably being generous, I would think. So, the work that's being done right now is really important by these companies, but it's really hard to know what will actually become an airplane and who will have the funds to see that through.
All right. I just want to take a quick moment and thank you, Brett. Mr. Cranky.
Anything. Hey, you is fine. Whatever.
For coming on the show. I want to mention that I've been a big admirer of all your work. So thank you very much for taking out the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to do it. And it is, I mean, you're in a fascinating market right now. It's really fun to watch. So hopefully you're enjoying it.
Expectedly, an insightful chat with Brett Snyder, the Cranky Flier himself. Next week, we will get 6C with some revenue and network planning. India's #1 aviation podcast is streaming on all podcast apps. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your fellow app geeks. Brett is at Cranky Flier on X and I am at Vishal Mehra. With that, keep your tray tables up, your seatbelts fastened. I wish you well, and happy flying, my friends.